So welcome everyone to our first support workshop of the year, and the topic is going to be boundaries. And it's kind of one of those topics like HIPAA that always needs a little bit of a refresher. And so we have two of our team members here that you can see in the screen, and in a minute I'm going to kind of shrink it down, and I'm going to have in the background, although I don't know how well you'll be able to see it on Zoom, but it's the handout that was emailed to you, so you can follow along with that if you want on another device. But we'll go through it together. There might be some interactions or some questions that Candace and Victoria have for you. And so just you can mute while you're not talking and then unmute when and if you have something to say or have a question. So just a heads up for everyone on that. So I'm going to minimize the Zoom and start recording Candace and Victoria. So if you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
Great. Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Candace Wilkins, and I am the manager here at Hines Hospice of Social Work, our social work department, and the Center for Grief and Healing. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today in this new way that we do things. Several years ago, we would have probably just had the in-person option, but now we're able to meet in person and on Zoom. So I'm sure that's something you guys have gotten accustomed to in the last few years. So just want to say thank you again for joining, and just thank you for your service to our mission and to our patients and families. It's so important that we have you, and we're so grateful to you. Each of us has just such an important role to play on the team. Victoria and I happen to be the social work part of the team, and the volunteers are very important, as are all of the other disciplines that interact with patients and families. So thank you again. I'll let Victoria introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Victoria, and I'm actually one of the medical social workers at Hines Hospice. I'm a part of a large group of other social workers, and again, just to speak with Candace, with just the volunteers, I've been able to go inside a lot of different patients' homes, and just hearing their experience of volunteers that they're connected with currently, and just the great sense of connection that they have is really important. And you guys are definitely needed and wanted. Your services are greatly appreciated. So truly just thank you for all that you do with our patients, families, and just the volunteer services department of getting our families connected with you guys. So yes, thank you.
So let's just do a volume check. Sven, can we get some feedback from someone is the volume okay? Are we talking at an okay? Maybe they can use the chat box or just respond, just in case we need to increase our volume.
Can everybody hear them okay?
I'm fine.
Okay, awesome, good, okay. All right, well, let's get started. So this is the first time that Victoria and I have done this training on boundaries, so you'll have to kind of bear with us in terms of we're not quite sure how long we're going to be here. So so we have several things to go over with you, and we want to honor your time for sure. But thank you just for just any feedback that you would even have after the workshop to help us know how it went for you. So we are going to talk about our boundaries today, and I would like for you just to think about what challenges in general you might face in your role as volunteer with our families. And if you were able to either view or print out the handout that we're working from today, you could jot something down, or if you want to just make a note of it. And this will be something that we maybe call on a little bit later, but just to kind of start getting you thinking, in the work that you're doing with patients and families, what could feel challenging that could come up for you in terms of boundaries. So we want to make sure and address any questions that you have about that, and just really discuss that with you. Now, my also encouragement is that as things come up for you during the training, you're welcome to unmute and ask a question or use the chat box. But don't feel like you have to wait until the end. So typically I like to do a very organic conversational style training. And so, please don't feel like you have to wait till the end to ask a question, okay? So, what are boundaries? Boundaries emerge from a deeper sense of our personal right to take care of ourselves and to be ourselves. Boundaries emerge as we learn to value, trust, and listen to ourselves. And really the goal of having and setting boundaries is to gain enough security and sense of self to get close to others without the threat of losing ourselves. And I think what happens is sometimes boundaries feel counterintuitive when we are in the helping profession. We believe that because we're helpers, which Victoria and I are as social workers, our nursing staff, all of the people that are working on our hospice teams are in helping professions, including our volunteers. Of course, this is the time that you volunteer, but it's still as a helper. And so I think that when we have the mindset of helper, sometimes it feels, as I said, counterintuitive to create a boundary because we feel like we want to help as much as we can. We want to give as much as we can. But the truth is that boundaries are healthy and they actually prepare us to be a better helper when we have boundaries. So kind of keep that in mind if that's something that you haven't thought of before. That I'm going to press into this idea that even though setting a boundary as I'm helping could feel counterintuitive, it's really important that we can do it so that I can be the best helper that I can be. Boundaries are the connections that we have between people, and sometimes they are more rigid and other times they are more fluid. So we think about the professional boundaries that we have, which are a little bit more rigid, and Victoria and I will talk about that. And then the personal boundaries, which are more flexible. So I'm going to start with one example, and then I'm going to ask Victoria to maybe share some things that she's learned in the field about boundaries, personal, or I would say more rigid or more flexible. So for example, in my personal life, if I'm out with a friend and we are having dinner at a restaurant, and maybe when I'm with my friend, we run into someone that they know, but I don't know. So it's kind of like a triangle at that point, right? So my best friend Lori is introducing me to her friend, Kelly, that she knows from such and such. And so to this new person I'm meeting, I might be, this is my name and I have 3 children or whatever, personal facts. This is what I do for work. Maybe how I know my best friend Lori, right? So I might just kind of already start engaging on a very personal level and sharing details about my life that I'm comfortable sharing. But in a professional setting, I wouldn't necessarily do that when I meet a family. I'm really focused on the work that I'm there to do as a social worker, or if I have clients, as in my role as grief counselor as well, if I have clients come into my office, then I am keeping focused on the work that I'm going to do with them, which is in a professional setting. So someone might ask me, oh, are you married or do you have children? And I would just give very short answers because I don't want to deflect or be rude. But I'm not going to overshare. So I might say, yes, I am married, or yes, I have 3 children. But I'm going to give kind of short one-word answers, and I'm not going to go into all the details about my children, etc. So that's just kind of one example. But I'm wondering, Victoria, if something comes up for you in this.
It actually just happened today. I'm not even kidding. I was at one of my routine imminent visits today, and it was the first time meeting this new caregiver. I never met her before. And so through our conversation, she was sharing, and we were talking about the patient and the relationship, and how she's been there with the patient for a couple of months. And then it turned into, oh, so are you married? Do you have a family? Because I think that they're also interested in these people that are coming inside the homes and helping. And so again, relating it back to Candace, kept it very simple. I said, yes, I have a family of my own, and a dog, and that was it. And then kind of went to the next thing, just to make sure that we're not taking the focus off of the patient and the family needs and placing it on my life and what I have going on personally. And so again, we don't want to be rude, so we don't want to just ignore the question as if they didn't ask it, but also be short and sweet to the point, and just not to overshare. I know that at times I've had connections with families, and so trying to make sure that those connections aren't going into a different direction outside of my role as the hospice social worker, and then also boundaries of, we do work closely with families, and so one of the things that I've gotten at times is they want my work cell phone. And so at times that can be a boundary that's overstepped. And so that's why we always reference to please contact the main office. Because again, sometimes we're not at work, sometimes we take days off, sometimes we're sick. And so keeping that boundary of I'm not available all the time around the clock. And you know, that can be hard because you don't want to hinder that relationship. But I think in order to keep those healthy boundaries, those things need to be kind of in place. For us as a social worker, for our team, and just also for the families, because I don't want a family to call me maybe on my day off. And then they're angry because I didn't answer or I didn't respond in a timely manner. So boundaries can be healthy, and I know that we worry that it might hinder that experience with the family, but it's definitely, I can see, more beneficial, so.
For sure, and I love that example of the cell phone and what if I'm unexpectedly off that day, or what if I, you know, this happened often, you know, during the pandemic. What if I got sick and I was off for a period of time? I want my families to know that they will always have someone accessible to them in the social work role. And it will likely be me, but sometimes it's not going to be me. It might be someone different on the weekends or after hours, or if I have time off. And so that might be the case, you know, with volunteering, is there might be another volunteer that has to come in if perchance you became ill or had to care for a family member or something like that. So we want to leave that open. I'm moving to page 2 that continues our discussion with why is it important to have professional boundaries. And I love this part of our discussion today because we're going to talk just a little bit about compassion fatigue, which is a fancy word. But what this says is boundaries keep us safe and keep us from burnout. So when we're burning out, we have hit our limit. We just feel like there's just not one more stressor that I can handle at this point in time. And it's not uncommon for people in the helping profession to experience compassion fatigue. But it's more likely that we're going to encounter compassion fatigue or burnout if we haven't created boundaries. Because going back to the cell phone example, if I keep my work cell phone on all the time and I take call after call from patient and family, then I'm not going to have any rest. I'm not going to have an experience where I take time for myself to good old-fashioned recharge so that I can go out the next day and greet my families and patients rested and having taken a break. I have to be able to do that to have longevity in this profession. Any thoughts about that, Victoria? Anything that jumps out to you about burnout?
Yeah, and I think with the boundaries, I think setting them from the start is really beneficial, because I think that if we don't establish the boundaries in the beginning and say that we kind of try and establish them later on, families can definitely get upset with, well, this is not how it was, but now we're trying to change it. And so trying not to give them that false hope of not being able to maintain something that, you know, we can't maintain. So the cell phone, you know, working hours, things like that. I just think that definitely establishing the boundaries, and even with volunteers, depending on, you know, the hours that you're doing with the families, you know, sticking to those as much as you can. I know that at times as me for the social worker, there have been times that I've had to stay maybe after hours because of patient and family needs. Either because, you know, I'm connected with the family or it's happening near the end of my day. And so I don't want to push it off to the on-call social worker, but you know, I know that there's situations where there has to be that flexibility to meet the family needs and patient needs. But establishing boundaries, I believe that the get-go is probably the best idea and best practice.
Absolutely. It's so hard to go backwards. It reminds me of this story when I was in high school and I had a teacher who it was their first year and they weren't very good with their boundaries. And then the next school year tried to come back and be really like a strict teacher. And we were like, yeah, we already know that we can get away with certain things. So that's just an example that came to my mind. I'm not sure it exactly relates, but it's the idea, like Victoria said, from the very get-go, we have got to know what our boundaries are and we have to stick to them. So we'll talk more about that as we go on. Boundaries are impacted by our own life experiences. when we have patients that trigger feelings in us, it could be because they remind us of relationships in our own life. So this is something we have to be aware of, and we're going to talk about feelings in a couple minutes here too. Because it's all related, that we are not robots, the volunteers that and social workers that we are that go into these homes. Or any of the disciplines, we have feelings, we have emotional responses to what's happening. But we have to be knowledgeable about our own life experiences in terms of how that could impact the way we feel about a setting we're going into. So I always give this example. I happen to be the oldest of 3 daughters from my family of origin. And so whenever I encounter a family where there's 3 girls, 3 daughters, it's always, I'm always on alert, not in a negative way, not in a bad way, but just in a, hey, I've got to be kind of mindful of, who is this person in the family? Is it the oldest daughter child like I am? And am I going to over relate to her so much so that I lose track of my role? Is it maybe the middle sister who might have this relationship, or the younger sister who might have this relationship? So that's just kind of one example. I don't know, Victoria, you think of something that would be an example for you?
Absolutely. I think for me, having the experience of having a grandparent on hospice. So whenever I experience somebody who was the same age of my grandparent, a veteran, male, that's always kind of like there with me, a little bit of a lump in the throat.
Right.
And then just also currently having my grandma who isn't on hospice at this time. But her age, kind of knowing that we're gonna get to that point at one point. And so trying to not get too emotionally involved, but in this line of work, you're gonna make a connection, whether it's with a family or dynamics, or whether they're good dynamics or not, complicated dynamics, there's always gonna be that connection. And so making sure you're checking in with yourself of, is this benefiting me, or is this benefiting the family, or, is this positive or is this negative? So yeah, I think doing a lot of self check-ins with myself, and there's definitely connections that you can make to families though. And I've had families before that have a deep sense of connection to the ocean, and I absolutely love the ocean. And so for me, I had one family in particular where they love the ocean. One of the patients, last kinds of things was she wanted to make it to the ocean. She wasn't able to. And so the trip I was able to go on, I collected a little bit of sand from the ocean and a couple seashells, and I was able to take it to them. And for me, I felt like a boundary wasn't overstepped because I knew that that was one of her wishes. So at least if I could bring that wish to her, I felt like that was only going to be beneficial, and I didn't feel like it was necessarily overstepping a boundary. So again, I think there's a time and place for those things, and but those are kind of some of my experiences with that.
I think that's phenomenal. And what really stood out to me in what you said is that I want you as the volunteer to feel confident in that you can still have a very worthwhile, impactful connection with your patient and family, and have that good boundaries at the same time. So they're not separate from each other, they can coexist. And that just might be something that someone needs to hear today. It is meaningful to have a connection and still say, my visit today is 60 minutes, it's 1 hour, and I'm gonna come at 9 and I'll be on time, and I'm gonna leave at 10 and I will leave right at 10. And you can still honor that time and space and make an immensely valuable connection and provide immense support in that 1 hour and still stick to the hour. It doesn't mean that if you stay an hour and a half, you've provided, you've had a deeper connection or have had more support. It just means you've gone over your time commitment or what you agreed to. But that's so important because you have things to do after your visit. You have your next patient to see. You have whatever the case may be. And so really hear that today, that the meaningfulness comes even within the boundary setting. Okay, so some of the things that we can ask ourselves in how much we disclose with patients and families is, do I feel okay about sharing this? We do have to pause and be a little bit mindful. Is this appropriate? would I share my actions with a coworker or supervisor? That's kind of the best tell. If I say something or have an interaction with my patient and family in their home, would I be okay reporting that back to Victoria, or would I feel a little sheepish, like maybe I crossed a line?
Mm.
Now, for the purposes of correction and correcting ourselves, sometimes we need to be open and honest and say, I think I may have overshared. Let's talk about this, and I'm gonna learn so that next time I don't. But it's good at the forefront, in the foreground, to say, okay, I'm gonna be mindful of, would I share this with Victoria? And if so, then it's okay to share. And then thirdly is what I want to share for the purpose of caring for the patient or for myself. So we're human beings, and we have needs, and emotional needs, and need for connecting. The purpose of our time with the family, however, is not to meet that need. We get those needs met outside of our work, and the time that we spend with the family is for the purpose of caring for them. So I want you to think about, how much do you disclose with patients and families? What do you do when families ask personal or probing questions? So there's a little space on your handout that you can kind of write that down, or if there's anything that you feel like you want to share, you're welcome to do that. But it's definitely something for you to be thinking about as we continue this training. Okay, next we're going to start with, we're going to talk about feelings. The best way to monitor our boundaries is by paying attention to our feelings. And I went ahead and included this feelings chart, which can be so helpful. And I'm sure there's lots and lots of feelings to that. I think Brittany Brown just did a teaching in which there were like 72 feelings that we have, or something like that. Which I believe it. And when we talk about feelings, I always reference the Disney Pixar film Inside Out. And so if you haven't seen it, you do have a homework assignment to see that movie, because it's very telling about the feelings. Victoria, do you remember what the 5 feelings are for the movie?
I know that there was the angry one. Lighting up the flame.
Yes.
There's the sad. There's was there worried? Was worried one of them?
It's fear.
Anxious, I kind of got from that one. Any takers?
Disgust and joy.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh, joy.
Yeah, joy. And so, what I love about this film, and I share this with adults and teens alike whenever I'm doing a training on mental health or feelings or grief, is that to me, the moral of the story that was told in that film was that we hold so many feelings at the same time. And so that's another thing I want to encourage you each with today, is that, we look at this, feelings chart, and we see all of these different feelings, and chances are we're having multiple feelings right now. You might be feeling tired, exhausted. You may have something on your mind, or worry. You might feel concerned, or you might feel really happy and excited because after this training, you're going to go out to an amazing restaurant and have a great meal. There's so many different scenarios that we can think of. But what I want you to all to think about is that you are going to have feelings when you are meeting with patients and families. And I'm kind of wondering, Victoria, I know that you started work in hospice even prior to your time at Hines here. And just when you started doing work in death and dying, and grief and loss, what are some unexpected feelings that came up for you as you're doing this work that maybe you hadn't had before, or that you were like, gosh, should I be having this feeling in the work that I'm doing? What stands out for you, or what comes up for you?
Honestly, one of the first things that I think of is anxiousness.
Yes.
And I think the anxiety piece for me was that this work looks very, very different day to day. Things can change unexpectedly, whether that's a death, whether that's people turning imminent, whether that's a family who is in a crisis of, I cannot care for my loved one anymore. What do I do? And whether that's trying to get them support inside the home or finding placement, which can be, I know it's stressful for the family, and then us on the other side of it, there's a deep sense of responsibility to support these patients and families, and so I think anxiousness was maybe one of them for me. And I think also just you can find joy in this work. And so it's okay to laugh with families through this journey. It's okay to share some of those feelings with them, whether that's that happiness or it's also feeling some of that grief that they're also experiencing, because again, we make these connections with families, and we're going into a very sacred space, we're going into their home. And so I always find a deep sense of just honor to be able to sit there and to be able to hear their stories and just to be allowed inside of people's homes. And I'm sure as volunteers, it's, to be able to share that with families or something like it. So I feel like by any given day, I could feel about 15 maybe different emotions. But really, I think just that gratitude of, yes, it can be hard and yes, it can be, stressful at times, but yeah, there's just a lot of different emotions that go into this work. So,
Yeah, I think you make a great point that, we go into these homes, to patient family homes, and we can bring laughter, we can bring smiles, we can bring joy, we can bring silence, we can bring just presence. And, after we have that experience with patient family, we're gonna go to our car or go to our next visit or go to our personal life. And we might have an emotional reaction to what we've just seen or felt or heard. And that's okay. And that's, and we learn how to find supports in that so that we can keep doing the work that we do. But I think in the moment when we're with families, the feelings that we're having aren't necessarily to be shared with the family, because we're doing the work with them, not for us. Now, it doesn't mean that I might not, do a, arm rub with permission and just say, I'm really sorry that the family's going through this. I know it's really tough. So, but that's about them. That's expressing a condolence or something like that. But acknowledging the place that the family is in, as opposed to me saying something like, I'm really sad that this is happening to Mr. So-and-so, and I just can't believe it because he's just such a, wonderful person. All those things might be true again, but the setting to express those feelings and thoughts is not with the patient and family. It's in a space outside of their home. So Victoria, I'm gonna let you read through the ways to maintain professional boundaries. You can do that.
yes. So verbally clarify your role with patients and families. So I always like to do at my initial assessments. Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm a medical social worker. This is my role. Just to kind of set that tone of kind of what I'm there for, the services I can provide, and how often I'm going to be going. I always also like to say, the next bullet point, identify approximate time frame of visit at beginning. So of course, for us, it's a little bit different, but when I'm going to see a family, if I schedule my visit the day before, I always like to say, okay, I'm going to be there between 9:30 and 10. If I'm going to be over that, if I feel like I'm going to be a little bit later, I always like to let them know that. But usually I try to stay within that time frame just so I can keep with my schedule, but then also just maintaining kind of that expectation that I'm putting out there. Sometimes you can do it for a little bit longer, a bigger time frame, but usually I just try to do a 30-minute time frame. Honor scheduled appointment time. So again, trying to, you say that you're going to be there between 9:30 and 10, really trying to maintain that. Clarify when you are available and when you are not available. So again, for me, my normal working schedule is Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30 p.m. unless I'm on call on a weekend or a weekday. Monitor how much personal information you disclose. Honor the policy of not giving out personal phone numbers. So that kind of brings it back to the first point of, if you do give your personal phone number, it's kind of setting that expectation of I can contact you when I want, whatever time I want. They might think it's appropriate to call you at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night when some people are crawling into bed and getting ready for, to sleep. So, just making sure that we're not really opening that to other possibilities of being available at any time, because really, we do need to, comfort ourselves in a sense of we do have a life outside of this, whether it's working as a social worker, as a volunteer, and just maintaining that boundary. Honor the policy of not giving or receiving gifts. So this is a really good one. I've had families want to give me something as an appreciation of, thank you so much for what you've done. It's kind of going back to, if you would like to, you can definitely make a donation to Heinz Hospice, but I'm not able to accept any kind of monetary gift or anything in that nature. And I get families want to say thank you and want to express that. And, sometimes I worry about, oh my gosh, I'm telling them no, so that I'm completely ruining this relationship. But ethically, as a social worker, I know that I have just a level of, standard that I have to maintain and abide by. And so definitely keeping that boundary of not accepting or receiving any gifts. And also, if they ever want to make a donation to the thrift store and things like that, there's other ways that we can definitely go around that. Utilize other team members. So I know for me, I utilize Candace as my supervisor whenever there's kind of a situation or scenario going on of like, this is what's going on, let's brainstorm this, how to go about it. And I know with the volunteer department, I know that you guys also have support systems in place too. And also, it could be something with the volunteers where they're collaborating maybe with the social worker who sees his family on a regular basis, or the nurse verbalizing kind of any concerns, because I know that you guys are going inside of some homes that, maybe you're seeing something that doesn't seem right or seems concerning. And then so just making sure that we're all kind of on the same page and addressing those needs and concerns. Be clear about boundaries that involve physical contact. So I know that for us, we can't, of course, provide any of the hands-on care, social workers, volunteers, things like that. But like Candace had said, it could be just a comforting kind of, rub on the shoulder and things like that. I know sometimes too, we can go into situations where a patient maybe has an illness that maybe we need to be aware of. And so I know that they try to make that clear. And I know that if I'm making a referral and it's something like, whether it be COVID or anything like that, just making sure that we're all aware, because of course that physical contact could be definitely not a good thing. And if there's anything that anybody would add, I know that Candace and I have been doing the majority of the talking, but is there anything that we've talked about so far that anybody wants to add or feels different about that, they might want to share?
Or even a question about some of these.
A question.
I think, I'm so glad that Victoria really touched on the gift giving. I think that is really one that we could struggle with, because it's, an act of generosity or gratitude from the family or the patient, but it really is an opening to a relationship that perhaps could step outside of professional into personal, because there's sometimes expectations come with gifts or questions or things like that. And so Victoria said it great. We've got our hospice first store, we've got our hospice home, which I always think, this hasn't happened to me yet, but if someone, did a baked good or something else, oh, I'm gonna run it by the hospice, and tell the family that, so they know that it's not, coming towards me or something like that. But I want to, of course, defer to what the guidelines are for volunteers here with Heinz, if I got any of that.
And then
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
to add to that a
Yeah.
little bit more too, I think a lot of the families I've experienced have a connection to Heinz Hospice. So whether that be the hospice home, whether that be our Center for Grief and Healing. And so if they are wanting to, do a monetary donation, I tell them that they have different services that it can go towards and support just the amazing programs that we have going on too. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how many connections families have to a certain part of our agency.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so let's pause. I don't know, would anybody like to ask a question or share a story or get our input or add to the boundaries? I just want to kind of be quiet for a little bit here just to see if anybody has anything they want to say or.
Feel free to unmute and speak up if anybody has any questions or thoughts or.
If not, that's okay too.
Stephanie did have a question. What was the name of the Disney movie? Oh, but I think we talked about that. What was it called again?
Inside Out.
Inside Out. There you go. Nobody has any questions so far?
Nope.
Felicia, did you have something?
No.
I want to make sure and say hi to Denny too.
Danny Candace says hi.
Okay, yeah, so the next question is, now that we've talked about boundaries, and I know we were kind of paused here for a second too, but I'll just follow up with this. Are there any other ideas about challenges that you face with boundaries, or can you think of a scenario that might come up for you? How would you handle it, or do you want our input on that?
For either of you, is there something that volunteers have come to you?
Oh,
Does
great
it seem like
question.
there's a constant kind of, this is what we're experiencing, how do we kind of go about it? Is there kind of a main topic of a boundary that maybe is kind of being overstepped or?
You know, we kind of talked about some of them that come up already. You guys have
Okay.
already addressed those, like
Great.
the gift giving, that one comes up usually around the holidays.
Yeah.
Although we tend to tell people if it's a small gift of appreciation, like a little bit, like a little plate of cookies or something like that, I think that's appropriate. But definitely no like gift cards or cash or anything like that,
Yeah.
which I'm surprised sometimes the families will be like, you know, trying to give staff and stuff cash. And it's like, oh, no, we can't do that. But you know, if they offer you like a cookie or something like
Yeah.
that, you know,
Yeah.
but that's also because I know not everybody's comfortable, you know, eating
Yeah.
and, you know, that kind of thing. So, but, and then the phone is a big one that kind of comes up sometimes. And
So for volunteers, how does that work with, once they get connected to a family? How do they communicate with that family? Do they have a hospice like phone, like a cell phone or?
no, they call it through, well, they block their number, star 67, and then leave a message. Like if like the family doesn't answer, they'll say, hey, this is so and so, I'm the volunteer with Heinz. I'm calling, you know, to talk about, you know, scheduling. I'm gonna call back in 30 minutes. It's gonna be from a blocked number. That's usually, but you know, sometimes, you know, it kind of.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
kind of funny, because actually, I always know it's Victoria calling me, and it's already.
My phone automatically when I call out to people. That's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would go call our IT person. You know, families are just, sometimes they just wanna know why, you know, why did I call on your personal, and I try to explain that if I'm out and I'm not
Yeah.
responding quickly enough, or I have a family emergency or something comes about, I wanna make sure that you guys are gonna be
Yeah.
seen by or heard from somebody in a timely manner, rather than, you know, not knowing when Victoria's gonna come back, so.
Because they tend to call the number that's most available, right? So,
Yeah,
did anybody else, volunteers, did you guys have any questions, like, you know, experiences, you know, around anything that maybe they've talked about so far, or, you know, questions about maybe something that's come up? I know we talked about at the Vigil volunteer training this weekend, and in the past, we've often talked about the touch and,
yeah,
you know, looking at, you know, body language and cues and asking for consent, you know, depending on what we're doing and, you know, things like that. So, anybody have any questions? Sarah, Stephanie, Renee, Kay, Denny, Corley, Betsy, Felicia? I think I got everyone.
I would, you know, I'm happy to talk about hugs too. So I'm a hugger, by nature. I will hug anybody. Except, yeah. Except when I'm doing my work. So, you know, it's kind of like, when I go into my role as professional clinician, I'm kind of like, you know, a superhero who goes into the telephone booth. Oh my gosh, I'm dating myself because there's no telephone booths anymore. And, you know, changes my clothes and I come out a different persona, you know. So when I come out of that telephone booth, I am Candace, a clinical social worker who does not hug my clients. Now, if my client asks if they could hug me, or if they say they'd like to hug me, I'm like, sure, because that's just my personal value as a clinician. Not all clinicians hug. But I am happy to do that if the person, if my client initiates that. So I think that's, outside my nature, I'm not typically that way. Like I said, I'll hug anybody, but I have to really understand that, if I initiated a hug with someone who is not appropriate with touch, or it made them uncomfortable, I really could be very damaging to the relationship. And that's not my goal. My goal is to foster a nurturing, emotionally supportive presence, but I can do that without touch. I can do that with, lots of other tools that I have. So I think, we do ask for permission. Is it okay? And I think for hospice patients, for me, what I find myself doing is going in when I see a patient lying in their bed and they have a blanket over their legs, I might ask the family member, is it okay if I rub their leg, the calf area? And, can I shake your hand goodbye or something like that? And I ask for permission. But yeah, just knowing that it's outside my nature and I just have to be a little bit different, but that's okay. Because then when I'm done working, then I go and hug everybody.
Okay, any other questions for now before we move on? Betsy, did you have something? She does, but you're on mute. Here, let me see if I can ask to unmute. There you go. We can't hear you, Betsy. You're muted. Oh, there she is. There you go.
Okay, good. It's not so much a question, I guess, as an experience.
Awesome.
My current client, patient, is someone with dementia. And when we started out, she was in more early stage. So I was able to ask her things like, would you like me to hold your hand? Would you like me to read to you? Would you like me to do something else? As it's progressed, I have been building on or maintaining that initial permission. So one of the things that, I forget which training, Sven, maybe you can remind me. Oh, it was
probably the vigil training.
Spiritual.
Oh yeah.
One of the best pieces of advice I thought that I got was not to take someone's hand, but to put your hand down and let them take your hand as a would you like me to hold your hand, and put my hand down under theirs, and they can either grasp it or move away or
yes.
So I think it's sort of like you can't keep asking permission, and the way I approach it is with maintaining the relationship as it goes forward.
Right. And let me repeat this for Candace and Victoria, because the audio coming out from you guys is really quiet. But so she has a patient that has dementia that she's been seeing for quite a long time, and asking for permission, for touch and stuff like that. But of course it's since progressed. And so, she mentioned something that we learned in Terry Little, our spiritual care manager's training that she did on spirituality. Actually, I don't remember, was that the beginning of the year or late last year? Anyways, but the point, one of the things that we learned in there is like, rather than, and I'll kind of try to demonstrate it in the camera. So if we have, your patient's hand that's laying on the bed, rather than dominating and putting our hand on top, she suggested, putting our hand underneath. And then that gives them, I don't know if you can even see that, our hand underneath, that gives them the opportunity to move it away or to,
I really love it. Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
and Betsy, you were saying too, kind of that, it's like they've had this relationship for so long. It's like, she keep asking for consent every time. Although I will say in the vigil training that we did this weekend, it actually came up, this very similar scenario kind of came up. And what Laura was kind of saying was that also sometimes that changes too for the person. Maybe at first they really wanted touch, and then depending on the disease, sometimes they don't want as much touch.
Right.
So, so that's a good way. And I don't know if you could really see the hand demonstration, but again, rather than putting our hand on, slapping it on top or whatever, we kind of tuck it maybe a little bit under their hand. And if we kind of feel it moving away, then that's maybe a signal that, okay, they're not really wanting that. Or if they like lightly grasp our hand or move it more on top of our hand, then that's them signaling, yeah, okay, I'm okay with that.
You know what I love about this is, love that example, and I think that my indicator, and I'm curious what you think, Vic, but, I would say if we notice, I don't think that you need to ask for permission week after week. I would say definitely check in once you've noticed, a significant change in behavior or disease progression. But this, idea of how the hand could be set to, provide the patient with the control in terms of whether they want to pull away or not, but I don't know what you.
I think that's a really good idea, because sometimes patients during the disease progression aren't able to verbalize what they're necessarily wanting.
True.
And so maybe that physical part, they would be able to determine what they're wanting and what they're not wanting. So I think that's a really good way of, giving them the authority to make that choice, with whether that's, they grasp onto your hand, which means, okay, I really want your presence in the hand holding, or I'm kind of wanting to pull away. Because with anything, I've even experienced with patients, they can become agitated, and, it can cause a little bit of distress. And so, yeah, I think that's a really, really great point that she brought up.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, thank you, Betsy.
Anybody else before we move on? Okay,
Oh, hold on.
that's okay.
There we go. Sorry.
So, okay, so the next portion is just how to prevent boundary violations. And this is really just kind of a repeat of some of the things we've already talked about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Give me just one more second. Sorry.
It's okay.
View gallery. Okay.
Okay, awesome. So be aware, pay attention to our feelings. If I feel uncomfortable telling others what happened in my communication with the patient or family, then it is possible that boundaries were violated. If I am unsure how to behave or about ethics of the situation, you can always check in with your supervisor. I'm sure that the volunteer department has their protocol in terms of who we reach out to. And this goes for really anybody involved. I would say the social work team. I, as a supervisor, have my people that I have to reach out to, and my director has, so this is for everybody. This is not just for a select group of people providing care or help to patients and families. It really goes for everyone. And we always want to act in the best interest of the family.
Yeah, so how to maintain healthy boundaries, realize that it may not be the family's needs that are getting taken care of, but it may be your own. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow, that is meeting maybe our needs more than it's meeting theirs. Realize that you can't take away the family's pain. And I think especially in the role that we have as volunteers or social workers or any of the other disciplines, we can't take away the pain that the family's experiencing of their loved one, passing away. And I know that especially when patients become imminent, sometimes families are well prepared for it. I have had patients, it doesn't matter on the age, doesn't matter if they're 100 or, younger, it's still really hard, and it doesn't take that pain away of that loss that they're experiencing. So even though we want to take it away, we can't, but we can provide presence, we can provide support, active listening, lots of other ways that we can help with that loss. But definitely acknowledging that we can never take that loss away or that pain that they're experiencing. Realize that you can't be available to families 24 hours a day, This means physically or emotionally. So again, with the phone numbers and things like that. And realize that you are not the only source of support, a source of support available to these families. So, you know, there's a whole team of people, so volunteers, social workers, nurses, home health aides, just a plethora, you know, we really are all a part of a bigger team.
So, here's what you can do for families. Help them develop a support network. Help them to understand the different team members' roles, consult and refer as needed. So this is something that I do a lot in grief counseling. So as I'm getting to know a new client, I might say to them, tell me about your support. And there's a whole many different ways that people respond to this question, this ask. Sometimes people have support in their significant other. Sometimes it's a sibling, sometimes it's a best friend, a coworker, a parent, a child. And sometimes there's many different people who are of support to my client, and sometimes there's minimal. Now, in a situation when where there's minimal, we really work on exploring who could be available to you, and we kind of brainstorm like, well, you know, I do know this person who was a friend. I've kind of lost touch with them, but I know that they experienced a loss similar to mine. And I think they might be willing to talk to me if I reach out to them. So we kind of work on things like that. And again, because I'm the therapist that maybe meets with them for 1 hour every 2 weeks, I have to really do the work to make sure that the client knows how to reach out for support to others around them when I'm not there. That's a really good boundary. And so you, as the volunteer, are not going to be with the family 24/7. Who can they reach out to when you aren't there? And what does that look like for them? Is it something they're developing? Is it something they maybe don't have the skills to know how to do? This is really when a referral to Center for Grief and Healing could come in, right? If you're the volunteer and you're with the patient or family, you could say, hey, we've got this great counseling center. It is for grief and healing, but it's also anticipatory grief. So we can help anybody in the family, even prior to the death of the patient, to build support systems, to identify and explore the feelings that they're having related to what's happening with the patient. So there's a lot that we can do to support the family in creating their own support system. And then, as Vic said, so we want to really make sure that we talk to the families about the other members of the team and who's available to them. Spiritual care, you know, what if you're having a conversation with the family and you notice, or the patient, and something comes up that's spiritual in nature, and we would want to refer them to the spiritual care counselor that's on their team. And then consult and refer as needed. So we kind of talked about that. You have access to your volunteer team. It's going to help you make sure that you are in contact, that they're assisting you in contacting the right resource within Hines for that patient and family. We want to encourage families to say yes to people who offer help. I wonder how many families, Victoria, you come into contact with where they're like, well, I don't want to burden someone, or I don't want to, and how you might encourage them to say, yes, I'm going to take you up on that offer to help me.
So one of the best things that I always talk about is, and it circles back to the burnout, you know, that we can experience. I always tell caregivers who really have minimal support inside the home, and, you know, maybe I'm trying to get them connected to the Valley Caregiver Resource Center. That's a wonderful program just in itself. And, you know, I feel like as the caregiver, a lot of family members think that I'm supposed to know how to do this. I know how to do this. I don't need help. I'm okay. But as time goes on, you can start seeing that burnout in these caregivers, and that they are needing that support. And so my discussion that I like to have with caregivers is, you know, if you're not taking care of yourself as the caregiver, and if you're not nurturing yourself, then how do you feel like you're supposed to care for this person, you know? And so just encouraging them in the sense that there's these other support networks that want to support you as the caregiver. So for example, Valley Caregiver Resource Center, or just other agencies that are out there. And so just letting them know that it's just an additional support system, letting them know that they have the control, if they can always try it out, and if it doesn't seem like it's a good fit, then okay, let's go to plan B. And so just encouraging them through this process, but I do feel at times that they feel that sense of, if I can't do it, then how am I adequate in doing anything, I know this person well, I should know how to do this, and so just also letting them know that we're the teachers. Sometimes this is family's first time with hospice, and so just letting them know that, it's a big role to take on, and so we just want to help teach them whether it's through the RN and the medications and physical care that the patient's needing, or through social workers with resources. And I always tell families, hey, we have volunteers who are amazing that can come out, and they might not be able to provide the hands-on care, but these are the other things that they can do. So just encouraging them through the process that they're not alone, and we're really here to support them.
It's interesting because the next point says role model healthy growth and boundaries and honor the boundaries you create. I think that when we role model healthy boundaries, that's probably my phone. That's behind you. It's telling me to go on call. Thank you, Sven. When we honor the boundaries that we've created with the families, when we role model that, we're actually encouraging the families to do just what Victoria's talking about, to create boundaries, accept help, say no when it becomes too much, reach out for help, and identify, I have a limited capacity as the caregiver. I do need help from others. I do need to ask for help. I do need to be able to say, I can only give so much to my family member during this part of the day because I have something else that I need to do and it's valuable to me. And so, of course, it's the social worker's job and the team member's job to say, okay, let me help you strategize how to create those boundaries within your caregiving experience, et cetera. So that's just one piece of that, of that kind of scenario that could come up. But know that in us keeping our boundaries, that we're role modeling for the families, and that could be really helpful to them.
And just one thing to add to really quickly to Candace is that I have actually helped families with establishing those boundaries in a sense of, they tell me, okay, this is the situation. I feel like this family member's coming over. They're constantly telling me what I need as the patient, but they really don't know what I need. What do I do? And so it's boundaries. What is boundaries? So then going into discussion about that, and then maybe making a list of, okay, what do you feel like you need? And if you feel like that's being overstepped, then how do you go about doing that? So yeah, absolutely. I've assisted with that too.
Yes, absolutely. We want to work as a team with other staff members. And let others help you. I probably have to work on that sentence. Support and encourage others to set healthy boundaries. And learn to let go. It's really okay for you to end your visit with your families and to go on to your life, because your life is important, and all of the other things that you have going on, your own families, perhaps your jobs, and time with your faith communities, or travel, your hobbies, whatever that looks like for you. And your continued investment in all of those things that make you who you are actually make you a better volunteer. But it's okay for you to be fully present in those things outside of your volunteer work, so that you can actually be the best volunteer that you can be when you're doing work with patients and families. Anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. I hope you all found this beneficial and helpful, and I'm here, Candace is here always if you guys ever have questions or a situation that might arise. But truly, you guys are appreciated, you're needed, and
Thank you so much.
thank you for all that you do, truly.
Do you guys mind giving out your personal phone numbers to everyone? No, I'm just kidding.
Is that exist?
I'm just kidding.
There a right or wrong answer?
I'm teasing. The grass, or what is it? The trainee has become the trainer? No. Or the I don't know what it is. Well, no, thank you. That was really great.
Thank
That
you.
was fantastic. That's why we wanted you guys to give this, because you guys have such great insight with your experiences with patients and family and just as social workers. And so thank you. I think I learned stuff
Yeah,
from
we
this. Great. And I know Miranda here
Yeah.
as well. Is there any questions anybody has?
I have a question.
Felicia has a question. Yes.
Okay, so going back to and I know about, Star 67, but there's also an app called Trap Call that
What's it called?
Well, it's called
She's
Trap
talking
Call.
about the dialing star 67. There's an app called
You know
what?
how it's called Trap Call,
Trap Call?
TRAP. Uh-huh. And you can download it. It's free. They do have 2 other paid versions, but it will unblock your call. It will show your phone number. It will show your name.
Oh, so they can download it and it'll show
Yeah.
the
So what do
name
you do
and
in that case?
number anyways.
So what if you have somebody and they're emotional, obviously, because their loved one is passing. They have Trap Call, you call Star 67, they can get your number. What do you do?
Well, I think you explained what we kind of explained today, why it is that we don't give out their phone number. So what she's
Right.
saying is like, what if they do have an app like that or some way to get your phone number and call you? I think you just kind of explained that, we do want you to contact the main phone line, because in the case that I am unavailable because, for many reasons in my life,
Right.
that we want you to be able to get help right away. And so that's how you're going to be able to get that. And so to please call the 226 Love.
Yeah, and I understand, but my point is that if they're going through an emotional crisis at any given point of time, and you are that connection, how do how many times do you tell them, even if you've told them once or twice, I know you got my number, please don't call me, do it this way, before you basically say, okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna have to.
She's saying like if they're calling and they have an emotional crisis, and I think if they're having that big of an emotional crisis, probably a clinician
Yeah.
like a social worker is going to be the best person for them to talk to, right?
I think it kind of goes back to the boundary setting when we start the relationship, in that here is my role.
Yeah.
I come to meet with you for 1 hour per week to do X, Y, and Z. And any needs that might come up for you outside of that hour need to be directed to X, Y, and Z, our 226 number or something like that. Now, if they call in an emotional crisis, that's probably going to be, a rare situation in which you could take down their info and you could call 226 and have someone reach out to them.
Yeah,
So we
that's a
could-
good idea too.
But I mean,
You could kind of talk them off the ledge a little bit, well, so to speak, kind of calm them down because you know them and let them know, I think it might be good to talk to Center for Grief and Healing or a social worker.
we have social work on call 24/7. So,
Okay.
They can reach out to, and the volunteer, I don't mind them, helping to facilitate that and say, I'm gonna take down your name and phone number, call the 226. And get them to, hook you up with the social worker on call or chaplain if it's the spiritual. care
Yeah, or
process.
spiritual care, yeah.
So either one.
Yeah.
Which,
But-
by the way,
but-
if you didn't catch that, we do have a social worker and a chaplain on call 24 hours a day, as well as a nurse and
Yeah,
As
such.
of right now, too, we have our on-call social worker, Jessica, I think tonight
Yeah.
she's on call from 4:30 till 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, so.
So we're
Okay,
24
but-
hours, even though we're not, not everybody's working 24 hours, but we do have people on call 24 hours a day.
Okay, but again, my question is, my thing is, where is that boundary for them? I know my boundaries, but
Right, so she's saying, where's that boundary for them?
So if they.
When do I-
Yeah, if they
They
overstep
keep
it.
Calling the.
Yes,
So then I think it gets to the point of
where,
somebody else would have to step in. I don't know. if
That's-
it's your
yeah.
parent or,
Yeah.
whoever, just saying, reaching out to the family saying, okay, I know that she, has expressed that this is becoming, often where you're calling the phone, and she's expressed, hey, please do not call my personal phone. I'm only with you from this day to this day, from this time to this time. And, if they continue to overstep that boundary, then it might have to be a discussion of how do we move forward, and if it continues to be overstepped, then what are the next steps?
Yeah, reassign, and we've had
Okay.
that happen where, you know, we've had a volunteer that just wasn't comfortable in a particular situation, and we have had to let the family know, you know, unfortunately, you know, your volunteer that you know, normally have is no longer available, and, you know, we'll be looking for another volunteer. So, I mean, if that's kind of like, you know, worst case scenario, reassignment and, you know, you know, maybe a little awkward conversation with the family,
Okay,
but yeah,
All
that's a
right,
good
thank
question.
you.
Thank you, Felicia.
So I was gonna talk about, just kind of this spectrum of people's understanding of boundaries. So I think the majority of people that we interact with are going to hear our words, understand, and, you know, accommodate or follow through with. And then we have kind of some people that maybe, you know, just in general, the concept of boundaries is a little harder for them to understand, and there might be some bumps. But I think clear communication and sticking with the boundaries is important in those situations. And then you all reaching out to your team or, you know, the other team members to help you if we need to touch on that, boundary setting with the families and the understanding of the boundaries, a little bit. You know, we can of course help facilitate that discussion
Absolutely.
too for understanding.
Yeah, and I mean, it definitely can be uncomfortable, you know, those conversations, but again, just because it's gonna be an uncomfortable conversation doesn't mean that we shouldn't have it. And I actually had a professor one time say, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so, you know, because we want the best, you know, scenario for our volunteers, for our families. So, sometimes we do have to reevaluate what those boundaries are and, how to, you know, maybe get them back on track. And again, it's to really prevent that burnout and, you know, just make sure that we're also taking care of ourselves too, because we really can't bear the burden of really what our families are going through, or patients, but we can definitely support them. And that includes those boundaries that we have to put in place, so.
Any other questions? Coralie?
And
Kay?
it's Stephanie. I do have a quick question.
Sure, Stephanie has a question.
So my question is, I understand boundaries, and I know individual training on Saturday that we did, there was a little bit of talk during that discussion where, you know, we have to kind of stay outside of the circle and that we don't get like emotionally involved with our clients because they're not our family. But just from being a human being, and I know some of us, you know, who do this a lot or who don't, there are certain patients or clients that will always pull at your heartstrings just a little bit more than someone else. And for whatever the reason is, and I think that's just a part of us being human and us being in that role as volunteers and the service that we provide. When that does happen and when that person dies and you are a little bit more emotionally, you know, attached or involved, despite your best effort, I know we have like the resources to debrief, but would that be calling the social worker, or when that time comes, who do we call to get that support, to talk about it, to debrief about it?
The Center for Grief and Healing could definitely support you, Stephanie. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. Because you're right. You know, I know you've been seeing a patient for quite a long time and you guys get along really well, and you've really helped facilitate some really special things for him, and along with the social worker and the chaplain. And
How
so
long has she been saying this?
I've been seeing him since October. I know this is a very,
October.
very patient
Yeah,
specific.
I mean, you know, look, the truth is that, you know, as a volunteer, and you go, what, once a week, or how often do you go?
Yeah, I see
Okay.
him once a
Yeah,
week,
so
and
October, you know, so, and I'm not sure what the prognosis looks like for this person, but, or this patient. However, you know, you are not in the capacity of, a clinician, and so I think, I don't know, Sven, you could correct me if I'm wrong here, but like a friendship develops, you know? You are a volunteer and you do maintain your boundaries, but you know, in that camaraderie that you have with this person is gonna come that emotional connection, which then will, what likely means grief. grief and loss, and we're gonna be there for you at the Center for Grief and Healing. It's no charge to you to come and see us and to just process through what that's like, and we can help you, celebrate and remember and honor that time that you've had with the patient, but we will not leave you alone to kind of to go through that on your own. We have our quarterly remembrance service that you're welcome to attend as well. So yeah, I hope that feels helpful to you and really honoring the time that you're spending. We care deeply for our patients and families, we do. And I know that you guys do as well. Just because they don't have my personal cell number doesn't mean that I'm not fully invested in them. And would have experience a devastating loss if I lost a client. And I'm sure, Trey, I don't know how long your longest patient that you've had. But I know with my team members that I say, and in fact, just one came today that I know someone has had for a long time, and I happened to go on a ride along and visit this patient. I was like, oh, she's gonna be so sad that, so-and-so passed away, and just, they just touch our hearts, and you guys are having those experiences in real time too, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another good resource is our Understanding Grief workshop that's available on YouTube that we will send in a follow-up email along with the recording of this session. But that's always a great, I know you probably watched it before, but it's still just a great tool to help, with that. So
Awesome. Thank you. That was very helpful. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thanks. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions?
No.
No? Okay, well, I want to say a huge thank you again, Candace and Victoria. Thank you so much. I know you guys are kind of staying late today to do this, and this actually has been very great conversation and really insightful. And Stephanie says thank you, everyone. This is great. And I know Renee said thank you earlier too. So thank you all for joining us. Kay, Coralie, Sarah, Danny, Betsy, Felicia, Stephanie, Renee. So happy to see you guys and very thankful to join you. And we'll have this as a reference tool for the future because we did record it. And we'll send a follow-up email to all of our team members in volunteer services. So you guys will have this in the future to look at. So, or listen.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
I am going to stop the recording.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.